They thought she was lost. They thought she was confused. They thought the woman standing in the lobby of the Hargrove Western Military Medical Center, in a plain grey cardigan and reading glasses, was someone's grandmother who had wandered in off the street. They were wrong about all of it. On a cold Thursday morning in November, in the marble-floored atrium of one of the most prestigious veterans' hospitals on the East Coast, a security supervisor named Todd Ferris made the kind of mistake that men like him spend the rest of their lives trying to explain away. He saw a black woman, 71 years old, moving slowly with a canvas tote bag on her arm, and he saw a problem to be managed. He did not see her posture. He did not see the way her eyes moved through the room with the calm, systematic sweep of someone who had spent decades being responsible for the lives of others. He did not ask her name. He would spend a very long time wishing he had. Her name was Colonel Audra Pemberton-Hayes, United States Army, retired. 31 years of service, 3 combat deployments, 2 Distinguished Service Medals, a Legion of Merit. A woman who had commanded a field hospital in a sandstorm with no electricity and kept every single patient alive until the generators came back online. She had not come to Hargrove Western as a patient. She had not come as a visitor. She had come because the Department of Veterans Affairs had invited her, specifically, by name, to sit on the quarterly clinical review board, a panel that had the authority to restructure hospital leadership, redirect federal funding, and in extreme cases, recommend the termination of administrative contracts worth tens of millions of dollars. She had arrived 20 minutes early. The lobby of Hargrove Western was the kind of space that had been designed to impress people who had never been to war. Tall glass panels, polished stone floors, a cascading water feature along the east wall, with the names of donors carved into granite. Pemberton-Hayes had walked through it without looking at the water feature. She had walked through it looking at the exits, the staff-to-patient ratio at the intake desk, and the fact that the 3 orderlies were standing near the elevator bay, doing nothing, while a veteran in a wheelchair was struggling to reach the call button on his own. She had stopped, crossed the lobby, and pressed the button for him herself. They talked for 45 seconds. He had served in the Gulf. She had been stationed 2 provinces over. When the elevator came, she held the door and made sure he was inside before she turned back toward the information desk. That was when Todd Ferris appeared. Ferris was a man who had grown into his title the way some men grow into an old coat that belongs to someone else. The word Sikoric was printed across his chest in blocky letters, and he wore it like armor. He was 43, thick through the shoulders, with the kind of face that defaulted to suspicion, the way other faces defaulted to smiling. He had been working hospital security for 11 years and had developed what he privately called his instincts, which were less about threat assessment and more about pattern recognition of a narrower and uglier kind. He had been watching Pemberton-Hayes since she came through the doors. "Ma'am." He stepped into her path as she moved toward the information desk. His hands were clasped in front of him, which was the posture of someone who wanted to look official while giving themselves deniability. "Can I help you find something?" Pemberton-Hayes stopped. She looked at him with the patient, measuring expression of a woman who has spent a lifetime being underestimated and has learned to treat it as information rather than insult. "I have a meeting on the 4th floor," she said. "The clinical review board convenes at 9. The board." Ferris said it the way people repeat something they don't believe. "Do you have credentials? Some kind of badge?" "My credentials are on file with hospital administration," she said. "My name is on the agenda. If you call upstairs to Director Halverson's office, they'll confirm." Ferris looked at the canvas tote bag. He looked at the cardigan. He looked at the reading glasses sitting on top of her head. "I'm going to need you to wait over here while I check on that," he said, gesturing toward a row of plastic chairs near the entrance, the kind reserved for people who were being managed rather than helped. "I'm 20 minutes early," Pemberton-Hayes said. "I'd prefer to wait upstairs." "Protocol," Ferris said. She studied him for a moment. "All right," she said. "Make your call." She did not sit in the plastic chairs. She stood because she had stood at parade rest in 115-degree heat, and she was not going to let a hospital lobby make her feel small. She folded her hands behind her back, the old habit resurfacing like muscle memory, and she waited while Ferris moved to the security station and picked up the desk phone. What he did not do was call Director Halverson's office. What he did was call the front desk and ask if anyone had called ahead about a visitor, and when the front desk said they weren't sure, he took that uncertainty as confirmation of his suspicion. He came back across the lobby with the slow, deliberate stride of a man who had decided. "We can't verify your appointment," he said. "Did you call Dr. Halverson's office directly?" Pemberton-Hayes asked. "We called administration. Administration and the director's office are not the same thing," she said. There was no edge in her voice, no heat. It was a correction, clean and precise, the way she had corrected junior officers for 3 decades. "Please call extension 4402. That is the Clinical Review Board coordinator, a woman named Ms. Teresa Wunt. She will verify my name, my role, and my appointment time." Ferris looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. It was not recognition. It was recalibration. He had expected pushback, raised voices, maybe tears. He had not expected someone who knew the extension number. "I'm going to need you to take a seat," he said. "I have given you the extension. I have told you my name. I have told you who to call. If you choose not to make that call, that is your decision, and you will own it." She looked at him with complete steadiness. "But I will not sit down." Ferris made a decision that would define the next several months of his professional life. He crossed his arms and said, "If you're not going to cooperate with security protocol, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the building." The lobby was not empty. It was a hospital lobby on a weekday morning, which meant there were intake staff behind the desk, a volunteer at the information kiosk, 2 nurses walking through toward the parking structure, and a young man in a veteran's cap sitting in a chair near the window, watching everything with the focused, measuring attention of someone who had learned to read rooms for danger. His name was Private First Class DeMarco Webb, recently discharged, attending an outpatient appointment. He had a phone in his hand and had been holding it for about 90 seconds. He pressed record. Pemberton-Hayes looked at Ferris and said, very quietly, "You are asking me to leave a federal medical facility where I have been invited to serve on a clinical oversight board. I'm asking you to leave until your appointment can be verified through proper channels. And how long will that take? As long as it takes." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into the canvas tote bag, the one he had been watching suspiciously since she walked in, and she took out a single document. It was a letter on Department of Veterans Affairs letterhead, signed by the regional director, naming Colonel Audra Pemberton-Hayes as a voting member of the Q4 Clinical Review Board, with a start time of 900 hours. She held it out to him. He did not take it. "I need you to leave," he said. "You need me to leave," she repeated. She put the letter back in the bag. All right. She did not leave. She turned around and walked to the information kiosk, where the volunteer, a woman in her 60s with a Hargrove Western lanyard, had been watching the entire exchange with growing alarm. "Excuse me," Pemberton-Hayes said. "Could you dial extension 4402 for me?" The volunteer had the call connected in 11 seconds. The voice that came through the kiosk phone was a woman's, brisk and professional. "Clinical Review Board Coordinator, this is Ms. Wunt Theresa," Pemberton-Hayes said. "This is Audra. I'm in the lobby. I'm having some difficulty getting upstairs." There was a pause on the line, a very specific kind of pause, the pause of a competent professional absorbing an unexpected piece of information and rapidly calculating its implications. "I'll be right down," said Ms. Wunt. Ferris had moved closer during the phone call. He was standing 8 feet away with his arms still crossed, trying to look like this was still within his control. The elevator opened 3 minutes later and 2 people stepped out. The first was Teresa Wunt, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a tablet in her arm. The second was Dr. Elliot Halverson, the hospital director, who had apparently been with Ms. when she got the call and had made the immediate and correct judgment that he should come down personally. Halverson was the kind of administrator who had survived in institutional medicine by being extraordinarily good at reading situations quickly. He crossed the lobby in 12 seconds, and the expression on his face in those 12 seconds moved through several stages that would have been uncomfortable to observe up close. "Colonel Pemberton-Hayes." He extended his hand. "I am so sorry for any inconvenience. Please, let me take you upstairs." Ferris unfolded his arms. "Dr. Halverson." Pemberton-Hayes shook his hand with the firm, brief grip of someone who had long ago stopped using handshakes to perform warmth and used them only to communicate directness. "Thank you." She walked toward the elevator. Halverson fell into step beside her. As she passed Ferris, she stopped. She did not look at him with contempt. She looked at him with something quieter and more accurate. "You had the extension number," she said. "You had the letter. You made a choice." She let that sit for a moment. "I hope the next choice goes differently." Then she stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. In the chair by the window, DeMarco Webb stopped the recording on his phone. He looked at the footage for a moment. Then he looked at Ferris, still standing near the security station, with an expression that was somewhere between defensive and hollowed out. Webb had been in rooms where things went wrong, and no one said anything, where injustice settled in like weather, and everyone just put on a coat. He had also been taught, by people who believed in the institution this building represented, that silence was its own kind of decision. He posted the video that afternoon. By 8 o'clock that evening, it had been viewed 40,000 times. By midnight, the number had crossed 200,000. By the following morning, it was everywhere. The video was not dramatic in the way that viral videos often are. There were no raised voices. There was no physical altercation. There was just an older black woman, in a grey cardigan, standing with her hands behind her back, speaking with the precision and patience of someone who has been absolutely correct and knows it, while a man in a security uniform chose, repeatedly, not to listen. The internet, which has a variable and sometimes baffling sense of justice, recognized this one correctly. The comments came in waves. Veterans posted first, with the clipped, specific fury of people who understood exactly what those medals represented and exactly what it cost to earn them. Then came people who had their own version of this story. Different lobbies, different uniforms, different excuses, but the same fundamental experience of being seen as a problem before they were seen as a person. Then came the journalists. Inside Hargrove Western, the morning of the video circulation was not a calm one. Dr. Halverson arrived at his office at 7:15 and found 17 unread emails from the VA's Regional Communications Office, a voicemail from a congressman's office, and his assistant standing at the door with the expression of someone who had been waiting for him specifically. "You've seen it," the assistant said. "I've seen it," Halverson said. He sat down. He read every email. He listened to the voicemail. Then he called the head of legal, the head of HR, and his deputy director, in that order, and asked them all to be in the conference room in 45 minutes. Todd Ferris was placed on administrative leave before 9 o'clock. This was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of a reckoning that took the shape of an internal review, conducted not by hospital administration, but by the VA's Inspector General Office, which had been contacted directly by the regional director after the video circulated to his office. The IG review did not limit itself to the incident in the lobby. It pulled Ferris's full record, 11 years of incident reports, complaint logs, and disciplinary files. What it found was not surprising to the people who had been working alongside Ferris for years, but it was extensive. 14 documented complaints over 6 years, the majority from Black and Latino patients and visitors. Patterns of selective enforcement. A grievance from a nursing aide who had been told to wait her turn in a restricted staff corridor, while white colleagues in civilian clothes walked through without being stopped. The complaints had been addressed individually, in isolation, by a supervisory process that treated each one as an anomaly, rather than evidence of something systemic. The IG review did not treat them as anomalies. The board meeting had proceeded on the morning of the incident. Pemberton-Hayes had arrived on the 4th floor, taken her seat at the head of the table as the senior board member, and conducted herself with precisely the same professionalism she would have brought, regardless of what had happened downstairs. She reviewed budget allocations. She asked pointed questions about patient wait times in the psychiatric unit. She moved a resolution on staffing ratios in the post-surgical ward. She did all of this with the self-possession of a woman who had long ago decided that other people's failures of perception were not going to interrupt her work. After the meeting, she made one phone call. It was to her daughter, Tamsin Pemberton, who was an attorney. "How are you?" Tamsin asked. "I'm fine," Pemberton-Hayes said. "I want to tell you about my morning." Tamsin listened without interrupting, which was a skill she had developed over a lifetime of listening to her mother. When the account was finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Do you want to do anything about it?" Tamsin asked. "I think something is already being done," her mother said, "but I want you to know what happened, so that if it becomes something requiring legal guidance, I'm not starting from the beginning." "Okay," Tamsin said. Mom, yes. Are you actually fine? Another pause, this one different. I've been standing my ground in rooms like that since 1986, Pemberton-Hayes said. What I am is tired of having to. But fine, yes, I'm fine. She was not the only one who made phone calls that afternoon. Halverson called a meeting of his full security staff. He stood in front of 15 people and said, with the carefully calibrated directness of a man who understood that this moment was being measured against a very public record, that what had happened that morning was not a protocol failure, it was a judgment failure. And then he said something that was not on any script, something that came out of the particular discomfort of a person who has had to reckon with the difference between the institution they thought they were running and the institution that actually existed. We have a complaint record that should have told us this was happening, he said. And we didn't listen to it. I didn't listen to it. That changes today. The room was quiet. This was not a satisfying villain's collapse. Halverson was not the villain of this story, and he knew it. He was a man who had built a career on competence and had been insufficiently curious about the parts of his institution that competence alone couldn't see. That is a different kind of failure, and in some ways a more common one. Ferris's administrative leave became a termination after the IG review concluded. The process took 37 days and followed every procedural requirement precisely, which meant it was not a dramatic firing, but a documented, formal, and final separation that he could not appeal on procedural grounds. The 14 complaints that had been treated as anomalies were reopened and reviewed. 3 resulted in formal findings of discriminatory conduct. 2 of those findings were forwarded to the VA's Civil Rights Office. The board voted, at its next quarterly meeting, to commission an independent audit of Hargrove Weston's security protocols and patient access policies. Pemberton-Hayes was on the panel that reviewed the audit's findings. The young man by the window, DeMarco Webb, was contacted by a reporter and agreed to be quoted on the record. He said one thing that got repeated more than anything else in the coverage that followed. "I've been in the service," he said. "I know what it looks like when someone's carrying themselves like a soldier." She walked in there like a colonel. The only person in that room who didn't see it was the one person whose job was to pay attention. The footage of Pemberton-Hayes walking out of the lobby that morning, the brief clip that circulated most widely, showed something that the people writing about it kept returning to. She did not look defeated. She did not look angry. She did not look like someone who had been diminished. She looked like what she was, a woman who had already decided that this moment would not define her, and that the person it would define was the one who had made the choice. There is something that people who have never worn a uniforms sometimes fail to understand about those who have, which is that the dignity does not live in the rank or the medals or the title. Those are artifacts. The dignity lives in 31 years of decisions, of being responsible for people in the worst circumstances, of choosing correctness over convenience so many times that it becomes the only available setting. You cannot take that from someone by not recognizing it. You can only reveal that you don't know how to see. Todd Ferris made a choice in a lobby on a November morning. He had access to a phone, a letter, an extension number, and time. He chose not to use any of them. Colonel Audra Pemberton-Hayes stood still and let him make that choice, and when it was done, she walked to the nearest available resource and solved the problem herself. That is the difference between a career built on the appearance of authority and a life built on the thing itself. Karma does not always arrive in the form of a dramatic reversal. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a record, documented and complete, that follows you from room to room until there is nowhere left to go that doesn't already know what you did. Pemberton-Hayes had a meeting the following Thursday. She arrived 20 minutes early. She walked through the lobby, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and was not stopped once. The woman at the information desk recognized her and smiled. Pemberton-Hayes smiled back, asked how her week had been, and listened to the answer before she went upstairs. That is what it looks like when a building starts to become the thing it was always supposed to be. If this story sat with you, if it reminded you of someone you know, or someone you are, hit that like button. It lets this channel know these stories matter, and it helps other people find them. Subscribe if you haven't, because there are more stories like this one, stories about people who stood their ground when it would have been easier not to. And leave a comment below. Do you think accountability actually came in this case, Or does real change require more than one termination and one audit? Tell me what you think. I want to know.